It was a Saturday afternoon when I got the message. A simple, road trip this weekend, just us, leave the world behind. I thought it was the perfect way to get some space and reset. I grabbed my backpack, my old camping gear, and enough snacks for the drive, and a few hours later, we were winding through quiet country roads, the sun dipping low on the horizon. As we hit the first stretch of open highway, the fields around us turned into thick forests, and there wasn't a soul in sight. It was just miles and miles of road, trees, and that creeping feeling you get when you're far enough from civilization to feel completely vulnerable. Everything felt normal at first. Classic road trip vibes, cramped car, random snacks, music playing too loud. But a couple of hours in, something shifted. I noticed the sky darkening faster than it should have. We've been driving straight east, right? Why's the sun going down? We tried not to overthink it, laughing it off as just a weird road trip moment. But that uneasy feeling grew when we reached a stretch of road with no signs, no markings, and no other cars. Just our headlights piercing through an unsettling darkness. There was something off about the way the road curved, like it was twisting us deeper into the forest, pulling us off some invisible map. Then, we saw it. It appeared out of nowhere, a dimly lit gas station on the side of the road, the kind that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. There was one flickering neon sign that read "Open," but something about it seemed wrong. It buzzed loudly, cutting through the silence that had swallowed our car. I slowed down, thinking about whether to pull in. We were low on gas, and a bathroom break wouldn't hurt. But as we approached, I started to regret it. The windows of the station were dark, and I couldn't see anyone inside. A single pump stood in front of it, old and rusted, the numbers on it half faded. I thought I saw movement through one of the grimy windows, a quick blur that made my stomach twist. But when I squinted, nothing was there. Just shadows. "Think we should stop?" I asked, mostly hoping for a no. But I got a nod. We rolled up next to the pump, and I reluctantly got out, taking the nozzle in hand. I noticed a strange metallic smell in the air, almost like blood, but heavier, sharper. The nozzle was cold, and as I tried to get the pump going, I realized it didn't work. Just dead. No gas coming out, no light on the display. "Hello?" I called, but my voice was swallowed by the dark trees surrounding the lot. Then from somewhere near the back of the station, I heard footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps. I turned to look, and a figure emerged from behind the building, a tall, thin man wearing a dusty plaid jacket. He didn't look right. His movements were too jerky, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, and as he got closer, I realized he wasn't blinking, just staring. "Pump broken?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. I could barely make out his face in the dim light, but his eyes, they looked wrong, cloudy, like they'd seen things that had permanently scarred him. He was smiling too, a wide, toothy grin that made my skin crawl. "Yeah, it's not working," I managed to say. He didn't respond, just kept staring. Then, after an uncomfortable silence, he muttered, "You shouldn't be out here. Not at this hour." That was it for me. I dropped the nozzle, jumped back in the car, and hit the lock as hard as I could. I shoved the key into the ignition and twisted, desperate to hear the engine roar to life. But all I got was a sputtering noise. I tried again. Nothing. Just the engine gasping like something was choking it. I felt sweat prickling down my back, panic rising. Come on," I muttered, glancing over at my friend, who looked equally horrified. The man in the plaid jacket was still standing by the pump, that unsettling smile plastered on his face. He hadn't moved an inch, just watching us with those glassy, vacant eyes. And then, As if he could sense my desperation, he raised a hand and motioned for me to roll down the window. I shook my head instinctively, but he kept motioning, his arm moving in a slow, hypnotic wave. Against my better judgment, I cracked the window just a few inches. "You kids lost?" he asked, voice low, each word a little slower than the last. "We're fine, just having some car trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes narrowed, and his smile stretched wider, revealing teeth that looked strangely wrong, jagged. "Funny thing," he rasped. "These roads don't like to let people leave." "What does that even mean?" my friend whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. "Sometimes folks find themselves going in circles," he continued, his eyes still locked on us. "Round and round, until they're not even sure where they started. Road'll twist you up if you're not careful." I felt a chill run down my spine. His words had this strange weight to them, like he wasn't just telling a story, like he knew. The man took a step back, his smile fading. "Car won't start, huh?" He tapped the hood with his bony fingers, leaving dark smudges on the metal. "Might be the road playing tricks on you, or might be something else." Then he turned and started walking toward the dark tree line. But before disappearing into the shadows, he looked back and said, "If I were you, I'd keep an eye on the trees. Sometimes they watch back." And with that, he was gone. Silence settled over us, thick and suffocating. I tried the ignition again, hands trembling, and this time the engine roared to life. We didn't waste a second. I slammed the car into reverse, and we peeled out of there, leaving the gas station and the eerie figure behind. As we got back on the road, my friend whispered, "Did you see his hands? They were dirty, but not like with oil or grease. It looked darker, like blood." Neither of us said another word. We just kept driving, hoping to find our way back to some familiar stretch of highway. But the road just kept twisting, winding through dense trees that seemed to press closer and closer, their branches clawing at the car like they were trying to reach inside. And that's when I noticed, no matter how far we drove, there were no signs, no mile markers, no exits, just endless dark trees. After what felt like hours, the road ahead suddenly straightened, stretching out in a thin, empty line. We breathed a sigh of relief, hoping we'd finally found a way out of that strange stretch. But as we picked up speed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the rearview mirror, a figure stood in the middle of the road, backlit by our taillights, tall and unmoving, his silhouette unmistakable. It was the man from the gas station. I kept my eyes on the road, but every few minutes I'd check the mirror, and there he was, closer, despite us speeding up. It didn't make sense. It was as if the distance we covered didn't matter. He was just there. Each time his face came into sharper focus, that horrible smile stretching wider, his eyes almost glowing in the darkness. "Don't look back," my friend said, voice shaky, eyes forward. I tried, but it felt impossible to ignore the pull of that face in the mirror. Against every ounce of instinct screaming at me to keep driving, I looked one last time. He was right up against the back window, staring at me through the glass. "Get us out of here!" my friend screamed, and I floored it. The engine whined as we tore down the road, the trees a dark blur on either side. For a moment, the figure disappeared from the mirror, and I thought maybe finally we'd shaken him. Then we saw the gas station ahead. I slammed on the brakes. It was impossible. We had been driving in a straight line for miles. But somehow, we were right back where we'd started. The same dimly lit station, the same rusted pump. I felt my chest tighten as I tried to process what I was seeing. This was wrong. This was impossible. And then, as if in a nightmare, the fluorescent lights of the gas station flickered on. The open sign buzzed to life, and standing under it, right by the pump, was the man in the plaid jacket, smiling at us, waiting. "This isn't real," I whispered, gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white. My friend looked at me, terror in their eyes, mirroring mine. "We just need to stay in the car," I stammered, trying to convince both of us. "We won't get out. We'll just keep driving." As I put the car back into drive, a strange scraping sound echoed from underneath, like metal on metal. My friend looked at me, panicked. "Do you hear that?" Before I could answer, the man raised a hand and pointed to the road ahead, a gesture that felt more like a command than an invitation. I pushed down on the accelerator, hoping to break free, but the car lurched and stalled, the engine sputtering and going silent. We were trapped, mere feet from the gas station. The man began to walk toward us. In the eerie silence, we could hear each step, slow, measured, each footfall bringing him closer. My friend grabbed my arm, shaking. "He's coming. Start the car, please." I turned the key, heart pounding, but the car was dead. No lights, no sound, just an empty, lifeless machine. As I looked back up, I could see his face looming at the window, his eyes wide and hollow, the skin stretched tight over his grinning face. He knocked just once, a dull thud that echoed in the suffocating silence. Then he spoke, his voice a low, unnatural rasp. "Didn't I tell you?" He tilted his head, that grin never fading. "These roads don't like to let people go." I don't know how, but I screamed and kicked the door open, dragging my friend out with me. We took off into the trees, branches clawing at us as we ran. We didn't stop, didn't look back, just kept running until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. Finally, we collapsed, hidden by the thick woods, gasping for air and listening for any sound of footsteps. But there was nothing, just the silence of the forest and the distant hum of the road we'd left behind. We found our way out of the trees as dawn broke, stumbling onto a quiet stretch of road where a trucker eventually picked us up. He didn't ask questions, just looked at us with a knowing expression as we climbed into his cab. Maybe we weren't the first. When we finally got home, my friend and I agreed never to speak of it. But every so often on a quiet night, I'll catch myself glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see that grinning face staring back at me. And whenever I see a lone gas station on an empty road, I make sure to keep driving.